Tom Gosse. He's going to be speaking on the Japanese occupation of Southeast Asia during World War II. Tom was born in London, Ontario in 1948, but grew up in Regina, Saskatchewan, where he was a member of the YMCA Stamp Club from a young age. He did not become a serious collector until after attending Stampex event in London, where he met Dickon Pollard, who was and still is a leading King George VI philatelic expert. He started off with the King George Worldwide Specimen Collection and expanded it from there. The one rule Tom learned from Dickon was to acquire the difficult material first and complete the rest later. Good advice. A mantra as a philatelist to live by, especially if one exhibits. Throughout his George VI collecting years, Tom eventually got overwhelmed as stamps turned to covers, turned to proofs, etc., so specialization became essential. He now only collects King George VI key plates, New Zealand 1936 to 1953, to include the entire pictorial issue, Newfoundland, Cochin, Travancore, Jaipur, and the Japanese occupation of British Southeast Asia. Eclectic like most philatelists, but keeps him interested. Tom first started exhibiting in Calgary when Fitz Roat taught him the black art of exhibiting. He was fortunate enough to win the Calgary 2006 Royal with a George VI Newfoundland exhibit, but had a long hiatus period before exhibiting on a regular basis. The recent upswing in virtual exhibits got him back into exhibiting. He recently won 3 large golds at the 2021 Canadian Royal Virtual Philatelic Exhibition. Tom has, however, expanded his horizons to now include the Japanese occupation of the Dutch East Indies, that was now in Indonesia and the Philippines. So it's an all-encompassing passion. Tom has been off and on a member of many philatelic associations over the years, but currently belongs to the PSSC, the RPSL, the Revenue Society, Dai Nippon, and the APF, the Australian Philatelic Federation. Without further ado, I give you Tom.
So, any good presentation, what do we start with? We start with the weather. This is the weather in Toronto today. Look at that. And this week, awful. Here it is in Brisbane. 30, 25, 26, 28, 31. Eat your hearts out. It's beautiful here. That's why I moved here. Well, I moved here because my kids married Australians, and so we're here. But grew up in Canada and still miss it. Anyway, so I entered an exhibit in Cape Town. I entered 2, but I entered Japanese occupation of Southeast Asia, and this is what it covered. There's a fair number of slides in this presentation, but I won't speak to every one of them. They're there for you to look at later on if you want to see some pieces of the exhibit. So it covered Brunei, Burma, Dutch East Indies, Hong Kong, all of Malaysia, North Borneo, the Philippines, and Sarawak. So it was just a 5-framer and about 2 or 3 pages, for each part. In Malaysia, of course, all of the various independent places. So the brief background, most of you, well, I don't know what you studied in school when you were, in high school studying the war, etc., but I don't think we covered the Japanese war very much. We tended to cover the European theater in Canada, but there was a lot going on in Japan, and certainly they really had quite the impact. And this kind of shows you the area that they actually covered during World War II in terms of their occupation. So it's quite large. And the number of people that lived in this area then was about 150 million people. Now the island of Java, which is this little island right down here, has 180 million people living on it. So population has increased in this entire area. But they didn't come prepared to run a postal system of this magnitude. Not a chance. I mean, So they utilized everything they could. They utilized the existing postal services, including the people. They utilized all the existing postage material, the stocks, whether it be postage stamps or postcards, all that. And what they did is they tried to obliterate any reference to the previous regimes, i.e. the British and the Dutch primarily, or even the US in Japan or in Philippines with Japanese identifiers. And over time, they also changed the cancellers from reading in the Christian date to reading in various Japanese or Thai type dates. So I'm just going to start with the island of Borneo, and I'm just going to start with just part that the British occupied or were responsible for at the time. And all of their stamps, none of them had any picture of King George VI. So they simply overprinted the stamps or obliterated the stamps with this particular, which reads Japanese Imperial Government. It reads from right to left. So this is the Dai Nippon part, which is Japanese and or Japan, and then that's the Imperial Government. So here's an example of two stamps on a piece of paper with a postmark. And so what we need to know before we sort of carry on when you see everything else is what this all kind of means. And this is called a katakana cancel. And from top to bottom, it reads Miri, which is in Sarawak. It reads the 1st of January, 2604, and this is North Borneo, the bottom little piece. Everybody can see the cursor moving, can they? Yeah, okay. So that's important because, we grew up speaking English and we didn't know any of this. And so when you look at a postmark, you got to kind of figure it out. And so you work at it. And so one of the things you need to understand is the difference between the year markings. So there's the Christian versus the dynastic versus the Showa versus the Thai Buddhist year. And so a lot of stamps have this dynastic year, and it's really, pretty easy to figure out. I'll talk about that in a second. But just remember this kind of foolscap kind of paper this is on, and we'll talk about that in a couple of seconds. So a brief explanation. So the katakana cancel is really a part of the kanji language, which is a part of the Japanese writing system. And it means fragmentary kana. That's what it means. And it really means that they just use components of the kanji language to make up words. I mean, they didn't have words for half of the cities and towns, et cetera, in Malaysia or Indonesia or North Borneo or anywhere. So they had to kind of make them up, and they kind of sounded them out, and they used the kanji language and took out pieces of it and scripts of it and used it to make up the various postmarks. For the Showa period, it's got to do with when the emperor came to the throne. So year 1 is 1926, and 1942 is Showa year 17. So if you see a 17 in the postmark, you know it's 1942, and 18 is 1943, etc. And it's just interesting to note that 1943, now in Japanese Showa, is now year 1. So the new emperor is year 1. So if you look at Japanese postmarks today, you'll see whatever 2000 and it'll be 60 some years later or whatever, right? Or 80 years later. Anyway, so the dynastic year is a little bit different. It's according to legend, Japan started in 660 BC. And so 660 plus 1942 is 2602. And that's pretty easy when you see the date 2602, because 42, 2603, 43, 2600, etc. So it's pretty easy to figure those out. But it's important to know it. If you're going to write it up and write it in English in an exhibit, you need to be able to say what year the piece of stationery was from, or the postal stationery was from. And how do we know all this? Well, it's not me that knows it. It's these people here. They wrote this book by Edward Proud and Milo Rao. I'm sure you've all heard of Edward Proud. He's written books on Canadian philately. Milo Rowell is a U.S. military person who lived in Japan and in Korea. He was a commander in Korea, and he spent a lot of time here. And he ended up collecting everything there was to collect in Japanese occupation. He used to have advertisements in the newspapers to come to the hotel and bring everything he had, and he'd buy it all. When he died, he had 15,000 covers and every kind of stamp that was known in that area. He's written books. He used to certify everything at exhibitions. He'd go and you'd find him and he'd write his name on the back of the stamp. And in this book are all the postmarks. So if we look at this one here, you'll see that it says it's Muri again. It's Muri at the top. You can see that. It's the 2nd, 5th of February, 2604. And this is the dates that the stamp was actually used. The hand stamp was used. And here's the stamp again. So I just took the postmark. Now I look at this, and this postmark's in the book, and this postmark was on those 2 stamps. And I say to myself, when I buy this or I'm going to buy it, I say, well, do I need to get that certified? It's always the first question that comes to my mind when I think of Japanese occupation is, do I need to get it certified? So the Green Foundation should be happy about that, except I don't go to the Green. I usually go to the BPA or the Royal. And, you know, it's tough because I think I've had more bad certs than I do good certifications in this material. So it's a bit of a mug's game, but there it is. And if I look at that, the 2 doesn't look like this, but these were kind of hand drawn. They weren't taken from anything, so you don't really know. So I went and got it certified, and here's the certification from the BPA. And it says quite clearly it's valid, it's genuine. It's dated the 1st of January, 1944, right? And it's based on these 2 stamps, Stanley Gibbons 18 and 19, and these stamps were produced in 1910. You go to the catalog under the Japanese occupation section in Stanley Gibbons under Brunei, and you'll see it says 1944, 1944. And what is interesting about that is that this is the 1st of January, 1944, and the first usage, because that's what it means. When they put a date behind Stanley Gibbons, it means that's the first known time it was used. Well, that's interesting because that means it's the first day of issue. It's like January 1st, New Year's Day. So, but it's interesting because it predates the date that they said that the stamp that was good for. It says 4th of February, not the 1st of January. Good reason to get it certified, I guess. You know, is it good? Is it not good? Were they wrong? Were they right? Don't know. But helps when I go to sell it when it has a certification. Even more interesting is that it says 1910. That's when these 2 stamps were actually issued. And it says there was no use for this stamp, the high value, because there was no postal rate for it. So a lot of the high value stamps, as you know, were for us to buy. A lot of us, we buy them and put them away, etc. So here we have this high value stamp. So if you think about it, the date to be used, 1944 was the first date, but the Japanese invaded in 1942. So that means 3 years this sat in some post office before it was actually stamped. It's getting harder to believe all the time, isn't it? But, you know, it is what it is. I actually think it's not from a cover or has not been sent in the mail. Obviously, it's canceled by favor. I think there was probably a book in the post office at Muri with all the stamps that were issued in 1910 and put in this book. And someone came along later and decided, oh, I think I should stamp those and cut them out and take the good ones. I don't know. But I'm pretty sure it's a good reason to get it certified. And I get a lot of certifications. I'm a certification hound. Here's another cover. So you'll see that this is 3 high values from North Borneo and from Brunei. This is a $2 stamp with the overprint. This is a $3 stamp, and this is a $5 stamp. And they're dated from the same post office. There's Miri. Here's the same postmark. Interesting, same date as the one in the book. Looks same, looks better. These actually look exactly the same. And if you look at the stamp I just showed you, looks better than this one. Right? This looks almost exactly like this. The two's the same. Everything's kind of the same. The star's a little bit off where this one isn't. So it's probably a pretty good cover. But I didn't get this certified. And this is a way more valuable cover than these two stamps. And so you say, well, why didn't I get it certified? Well, the reason is this book. This is the leading light in Japanese occupation of Southeast Asia, Masayoshi. You can see his book at this website. So you'll be able to go and click on that, and you'll be able to see his entire book. It's really just an exhibition. It's page after page of an exhibition that he has put together over the years. And in that book, on this page, is this cover. Interesting. Well, looks kind of the same, doesn't it? Let's see a little bit more close up. Wow. Well, I don't think this could be more philatelic than possible. Like this, you know, you don't get a lot of points for this in a postal history exhibit because they don't like philatelic covers. But this is a very rare cover. These are the only two I've ever seen. This is the only ones I've ever seen with these used on cover. So, but these stamps were only authorized for fiscal. But $10 worth of a North Borneo dollars in British pounds today is equivalent to 525 pounds. So it's like you going down to the post office and saying, I'd like two covers and here's $2,000. Put them on and send them to me. Well, I didn't think it was necessary to get the certification because I can just kind of refer to this book and say, look, it's the same kind of cover. It's obviously philatelic by nature, but, you know, I like his better because he's got corner pieces, but what the heck. First day cover, same thing, same typewriter. You can see the same E is the same. Everything's the same. This is the Japanese characters for registered. And that's what my page looks like in my exhibit. So I have the three stamps, two stamps. Actually, this one doesn't have this part across the top. This one, these two do, but the color's a bit different. So I show these three stamps in this cover. And that's what one of the pages in my exhibit looks like. And the red dot was always kind of to indicate something important. I tried to do that in the previous exhibit in Toronto, and I got heck from the judge for having too many red dots. And you know, all know who the judge was because he's coming back from South Africa. Canadian. At any rate, he also told me I didn't have enough Hong Kong stuff in it because he has lots of that. So that's that. So here's some more from North Borneo. You can see the same type 1 for North Borneo versus Brunei. I just thought I'd show you these because they're kind of interesting. This one doesn't have, it's missing an overprint in the middle. I have quite a few of these. They obviously catalog very well, but you know, was it a mistake or was it done on purpose? No, well, no one will ever know, I guess. This is an interesting cover because it is paying the correct rate, right? From Sandakan to Tawu, 4 cent was the correct rate, and they put out a war tax stamp to collect money for the war. So you got to put this on extra and pay an extra cent, and it went to the coffers of the Japanese. Here's Labuan. And it's just a page in the exhibit that kind of shows the same overprint again, both on an angle and straight across, and on a piece of postal stationery on an angle, and also on just a straight letter, and it's paying the correct 8 cent rate. So that was the rate in those days. And a lot of this is written up in other books. This is written up on its correspondence with the Reverend David Hubbard. And you can read that in books published by Sarawak Postal Sarawak Society. Here's Sarawak again. I just showed the few covers because they're hard to get. This is a nice postcard with a Japanese stamp used on it. So in 1943, it's still allowed to use Japanese stamps. They brought them with them and they used them there. This is an old cover. So it's a 1934 postcard. And then they continued to use them during the war, and they just overprinted them again. And then this is a foreign rate, and this was the local rate. So 8 cents to go out of the country, 4 cents to stay inside. And you always get nice little chops and you know, these things here and this here. They're always kind of interesting, and you can look them all up. People have written about all these, and I'll show you a little bit of that later. So that's I probably had 8 pages or so in those countries or those territories. And now this is Burma. Burma used the peacock as the overprint to because most of the stamps had a George VI portrait on them at the time, and they used this peacock to obliterate the face. A lot of people say that these are hard to distinguish. They look pretty easy here, right? How hard can that be to pick those out? But a lot of times they're blurred. They weren't put on very carefully, etc. So here's kind of 4 different ones, and you can kind of, when you look at them in large pieces, you tend to be able to pick them out relatively easily. This one's pretty easy here because it looks like this one here. This one's narrower, so it looks like these here. This has got more to its, you can see its wings better. And also there are 4 different types. Just the way the neck goes, there's a description of the neck goes this way, the neck goes this way, the neck goes straight up. So it's just interesting to collect them in blocks because you usually get all 4 positions. So they all have names. They're where they were actually overprinted. This is in Hinzanda. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce this one, but it's Mayagama, I guess. And this is Mayagama type 2, and this is Payapan. And when you collect them, you can collect other things amongst these other than just the overprints. You can get what's called pin flaws. You can see this line here in position 7 up here. So there's the pin flaw it's called, and pin position 34 is here. All right. And you can tell it's a pin flaw because this overprinter is actually in the Royal Philatelic Society's museum in England, and you can see it's actually a pin. And that's for this one here. You can see them here. Yeah. I find that kind of interesting. And most of these, except for this one, is all from the collection of Alan Meach, who some of you might remember or know. He's from Edmonton, and he sold his collection in an auction in the United States, and I bought a lot of it. That was a very good collection. He collected for a long time, and he was the head of the Burma Society for a long time. But these are the things that are more interesting to me, at any rate. This is a handmade cover used in Burma, or Myanmar now, but Burma then, and no overprint, no obliteration, which was not legal by the Japanese rules. And so what they've done is they've said, well, we're not accepting that, and you have postage due here. Right, and it's been to a bunch of places, and then it was sent back, and you can see that it finally got to where it was supposed to get to, but somebody paid some money at the far end, and lots of things written on it, and I just find those things more interesting. I still got a lot of research to do in the cover because, you know, it says it arrived in 18th of September, and you can see it says 18th of September 42 here, but there's other dates over here. Here's the 25th of September. Which is after 42. So this was what was written up when I purchased it, but I think there's a lot of work to do to find out where this cover actually went and came from. So a bit of work to do yet. This is something else that I put in the exhibit I found interesting. This is called the farmer issue, but what it is the farmer issue was printed by the Deputy Director of Posts and Telegraphs at his home during the war. And he did it on an old treadle press that he borrowed. And after completing all of these values, and there's probably about 8 of them, the press was returned to his owner, who died soon afterwards. This is the story, good story. In 1948, the old press was sold, and the new owner discovered, once he was unpacking the platen, a double folded piece of coarse paper containing impressions of complete sheets of the 10-cent and 30-cent C tenet like this. Only one interprintout block was intact, the remainder was severed, and the sheet was unfolded. And I own this part, and Gerald Davis did own this part, I think. No, anyway, I just found it interesting story. It's interesting in an exhibit. It's certified by Holcomb. I don't know how he certified it. I mean, yeah, it's real. I don't know if that's true or not, but I just found it interesting, and more interesting than sometimes just looking at stamps. This is another page in that exhibit. It just shows this is a plate proof. This is the back side of it. It's a photo of it. It's upside down on this side. It's Imperf. It's just kind of interesting. You can see other parts of the farmer issue. Here's one with a vertical Imperf between. Here's one of the small C, and the C is small here where it's large in all the other ones. Here's an Imperf between on this, and here's a cover. So, it's hard to get covers from Burma. It's also very hard to collect them, especially with the peacock overprint, because it's been said by the Peacock Society, that write the Peacock newsletter every week, the Burma Society, that a lot of those cancellers were available after the war, and so were the stamps, and they just put the dates during the war and sent them to themselves. And so there's a lot of issues around whether you've got a good one or not, but these are pretty okay once you can find them. So that was Burma, Dutch East Indies, consisting of a lot. I never did collect this until the last few years, and it is the most amazing place to collect. You will never cover this place. Sumatra had over 110 obliterations with multiple colors, and it included all of these places. They were all under separate postal administrations during the Dutch. Java didn't require obliterations, but you couldn't use Queen Wilhelmina on the stamps that were there. They were destroyed. And then the naval was all the other occupied areas of all these that were islands around Indonesia. It's a huge place. Lots of people. And just to show you, you need this book. Otherwise, you can't find anything. I mean, you look at something you'd never know. This is a fabulous book. It's done by the Dai Nippon Society. It is the catalog. It gives pricing, sort of. But it does go through all the various obliteration types, all the stamps that were issued, multiple obliterations, all the colors, everything. And here's just a sample of some of the 110 obliterations that you'll find on the stamps, which, like they had stars, they had the flag of Japan with the sun, they had X's, they had Dai Nippon in different stamps, X's, Star of David they used, unbeknownst to them, it was the Star of David. They thought it was just a star. Signatures when they didn't have any kind of obliteration sent to a place, and they just used their signature or a signet ring. Other kind of things like these anchors were all used in the Navy occupied areas. And that's just a few. Like I said, there's probably 200 of them. So you can imagine, and all different colors. So the other thing you need to know is about postmarks, because it gets very complicated in the Dutch East Indies. These postmarks were what was started by the Dutch in 1916. They're called long bar cancels. And you can see that here's one with dashes in the outer circle. Here's one where the circles and the bars are continuous and the circles close. And here's one the bars aren't continuous. Here's where they use dots in the outside. I mean, it goes on and on. This is just 3 of the probably 30 or 40 that are in a book. Then the Japanese introduced the new dating, right? So, show year 18, the dynastic year 42. So they got very complicated and everything changed. And then it got more complicated because then they started using Japanese characters to represent. Well, they did it in the Navy because the Navy didn't use a date either for anything. They didn't put dates on anything because they thought it would be not safe. Security reasons, the Navy, all those other islands never use dates. And then they started using different colors as well and different ones as well, circles, and it just goes on and on. And this is one page, and you need to get this book, which is called The Cancellations, again by the Dai Nippon Society, 42 to 49. They include part of when they became a republic as well. So it's a book that's relatively thick and has every cancellation done. The work that's been done on these books is amazing. I mean, I've been looking at philatelic books for a long time. These are works of art. They spent so much time trying to figure this out, and I give them all the credit in the world. Here, for example, is just a selection of the high values that were used. You can see, different cancellations on some of them, different colors of anchors done in different places, different overprints or different obliterations. There's a Dai Nippon one. Here's another anchor. So, these are in the exhibit, and I would create a page that kind of might look like this. So here's one page, right? And various overprints. That's all the anchor overprints from this particular location. And it just gives you a flavor because there'd be literally hundreds. That's just an envelope. You can see the anchor here. It's been overprinted on a postcard. Yeah. And sent inside of Indonesia for 3.5 cents. It's an old postcard. It's a Dutch postcard. Here's some more overprints. Here's the Star of David that they didn't know. Here's a signature, for example. Here's a double signet ring from the person who's the postmaster, and an IPL overprint here. And that's the postmaster, and the IPL you can already hardly see, but it's in there. And it's the only one known, only example known. So interesting in an exhibit, I guess. And that's actually used on a telegraphic money transfer. So that's the way they moved money around in the Dutch East Indies, was by telegraphic transfer. But this cover is more interesting to me than the stamps. This is a cover that comes from the WWII Chung collection out of Hong Kong. Finding covers back to Japan are difficult. Most of the covers you find are internal within the Dutch East Indies. But this goes to Nagoya, Japan, and you can see that it's actually a piece of postal stationery. It was this orange here is actually in the postal stationery. It's not a stamp. It's been overprinted and reduced to 10 cents. So they reduced postage for quite a while first, and then they increased it. They did a bunch of that stuff. I'll show you in a minute. Here's a stamp without any obliteration, and here's a stamp with the obliteration. So it's just a very difficult cover, and it's registered. It pays the registration rate as well as the rate to get from Padang, which is in the island of Sumatra, over to back to Japan. And you can tell it's Japanese character, so it's sent by somebody who was Japanese who lived there. When you think about it, the Japanese took over this place and didn't speak any language. They didn't speak anything. They didn't speak Indonesian, and so all the stuff they've done, they wouldn't have known half the things they did. Here, for example, they revalued almost every piece of stationery there was. Here's a piece of stationery that was originally 7.5 cents. They revised it to 5 cents when they reduced it, and then they increased it later to 8 cents. And this is just from one town to another inside of and there's lots of these. So a cover might look like, a page of my exhibit might look like this. Various overprints of the Dai Nippon overprint. And then here's revalued postcards. 2 cent, and then the 2 cent got crossed out, made it back to 3.5 cents. It's just the way they did it, and there's literally thousands of them. Here's that purple postmark that you saw earlier. It's in South and East Borneo. And all of these letter cards and postal stationery is all in this book by Beltran. He's another writer for Dutch writer who's written about all these. You can see the censor. It's called a Kanetsuzumu censor. They're all called that. This is Kanetsuzumu. And this is the words for South and East Borneo. So, yeah, I like this cover. I find it more interesting, again, than just a standard cover. This is a cover that's bearing 6 stamps sent from Makassar. And it has, it's a registered cover, but they had no ability to send registered mail from the island. And it was destined for Depok, which is on the island of Java. So it was from around Bali to here. And this word here means registered. So it was all these stamps were put on. And what they did is they couldn't register it because the Naval Administration hadn't approved anything for registered. Whoops, sorry. I got to go back. So they wrote this on. They pinned this piece of paper on, right? And then sent it off to Sarawak, where they registered it there and sent it on. So it's kind of an interesting route, to say the least. So they paid the money up front. Again, here's the cancel with no date, but here's the cancel with a date when it got to be registered, because on the island of Java, they used dates. So it was the 30th of March, 1945. And just a good cover. This is one of my favorite pieces in my collection. It's the only ones known. There were 5,000 of these stamps, provisional stamps, printed at a mission on Flores Island, in the Lesser Sunda Islands. They only printed 5,000. Only 500 were sold. The rest were destroyed. There are less than 50 known. So here's what they look like. This is a block of 6, so 6 out of the 50. And it's the left side of a sheet of 10. So they were produced in 10s. And at the top, you'll see that it's written this Dutch, which was Japanese postage stamps printed at Enda. But the word for printed was Gedrukt. And so it's missing this stamp. And so, you know, other than this plate error that's here, which is the only place it occurs, but it occurs on every sheet, you need to have this extra stamp, which I happen to get a hold of. So now I have the complete writing of what was on there to begin with, which I think is kind of interesting. And I also found a used copy, and there's only 9 known from this particular post office. And it just, I like this page. And so I'll show you the page in a minute, but just interesting. Here it is in the book written by J. Van Nieuwkerk. It's a beautiful book, one of the best philatelic books I've ever seen written up. And I've seen a lot of them. So there it is, the piece. It's in his book, and it's the only one known, only block known, only multiple piece known. This also came from Flores Island, same person. It's got the same little symbol or censor, seal, I mean. And this is the censor here, up here. It was a censor. It's just a postcard, you think. Only 9 postcards recorded. But they actually printed incorrectly. It should have been 3.5. And when the guy was asked later after the war, much after the war, there's a book written about him. He said he didn't realize it was 3.5 cents to send a postcard. He thought it was 5 because it used to be 5, but he didn't realize it had been reduced. So I had these printed on the island, and that was it. They went out as that. And so this is what the page looks like that I exhibit. And that's the showing 2 relatively scarce items. Whether they're how's the word used in the exhibiting world? Whether they're significant or not, I guess, is up to the whoever is reviewing the exhibit. I said they were significant. Here's another interesting cover from there. It's called, was the Sun. I think I showed you that in one of the, it's called the sun rays overprint. You can see it on this card here. These were actually overprinted in Lombok. And you can see this was the part that was overprinted. This was also overprinted. And this was the actual censor mark that was used there. Then they sent it off to Ampinan. And that's where it got sent from. So this was the original postmark. It got sent there, and then they put another postmark here. It's another overprint in the middle, and then they put their mark on it, and it got sent off. So it's the only one known. It's the only one known with a complete sun rays overprint. So it's a very interesting cover, and it's also written up in that previous book. So I like this cover as well. And that's what the page kind of looks like. So there's a few stamps with the sunburst and then cover, and then some of the anchor overprints that occur on other values and different types of anchors. You can see how much this is thicker, this is thinner. How you really know, I don't, you kind of take a little bit of a guess, I think, but that's how it works out. And then connecting to Malaysia, I'll just connect to going to the next slide, which is Malaya. This is simply the war, or the Riau Islands were part of Dutch East Indies, but they were so close to Singapore that the army decided that they would come under the Malayan Postal Administration and use Malayan stamps. So this is just a postcard that was used in Malaya from Perak, but it was used in the Riau Islands. And they're hard to get, and there's going to be a book written about it again coming up shortly, come out probably before Christmas, again by Van Noondijk. Noonkirk, sorry, and he's writing about just these islands and the Japanese postal system there. So it's kind of an interesting cover. When you go to Malaya, their obliterations were totally different and not very many. So that's easier to collect, and you can look in Stanley Gibbons and you can see them. This is called a frame chop. There were 9 of them. And the Japanese call them type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. If you look in a Japanese catalog, that's what you'll see. If you look in English, it's usually called the Philatelic designation, and it uses letters. They're relatively, everybody says they're complicated, and they are when you first start looking at them. They look all the same, but they're all different. You can see this one here, this particular character, and I'll show you what that means in a minute, is bigger. They're all a little bit different. These B's are different. This B is different, etc. They all have a little bit of something different, and you can spot them unless they're all smudged. You get a double frame chop. You can get the Dai Nippon again. There's the same kanji characters for Dai Nippon. There were seals, and there was what's called the Malacca chop block, and I'll show you some of that quickly. You need this book by Galati to understand this, and he talks all about what all these characters mean. He shows every one of them. He shows where the differences are. So if you get the book, you can follow along and figure out what they are. But a fellow like the fellow who wrote that book, he can just look at them and say, that's it. That's it. That's what it is. He doesn't have, if you've grown up with the language, you know them right away. So that's how I collect. For this particular area, it didn't come out here, but those are all the different chops for this one stamp in Neger Sabah. So that's not how Stanley Gibbons, they just tell you there's one red, and there's one violet, and there's one black, and there's one brown. That's what they'll say in the Stanley Gibbons catalog. But this in the Japanese catalog will say all of these types of reds exist, all of these types of violets exist. And so you can see I don't have them all. I'm still working at it. And they're hard to, because nobody really talks about them like this. They just say, I have Stanley Gibbons J something or other, and that's all they don't really tell you the chop many times. This is an interesting cover, again, unobliterated, sent from in Johor, and sent and returned because there was no service, because there was war on, or the Battle of Mar was on in 1942, and it was sent back. But still, getting covers without the various obliterations is hard to do. I'll just quickly go through the various states. Kelantan, here's a nice double overprint, black on red, with what's called a Singhawa seal. Here's one with the Handa seal, is on that other one. You can see the seal's a bit different than this one. And here's a cover. It's a registered cover. It's 19 cent on 15 cents postal stationery, and it was sent to Kuala Lumpur. And there's less than 5 of these known. So it's an interesting piece of postal stationery and used properly. Here's that same stamp again, and here's the cover. So that's what the page looked like that I submitted to in South Africa. This is the Malacca chop block. Has to be over 4 stamps, if you can find them over 4 stamps. So this is the largest piece I've ever seen, and I think it looks interesting just because it shows you how they did it. Here's the high value $5, and here's a very difficult 8-cent used on postage due. And you can get them on covers. This is the cover page that I put in, and you can see that it comes on a piece of postal stationery. It comes on, I've never seen a used piece. I've just seen a mint cover. Seen a number of them. Here's a piece of on a postcard. Here's a postcard with a full Malacca chop on it, and then here's one with 2. You notice the person's name, Tay. You know, it's kind of like Groves in Newfoundland. You get covers with his name on them all the time, and without him, we wouldn't have these. You know, it's kind of like that first one I showed you. Without the fellow sending himself a letter, we would never have any of these on cover, probably not full blocks, etc. So, I guess we have him to thank for it, but it's probably very philatelic. You can see this. I find this interesting. It said first day cover, right? April 23rd. You can see that there, April 23rd, 1942. What's interesting is here's the chop, 1942, but it says it wasn't really available until the 21st. It says it was available on 21st. And yet this says first day cover, and it's the 23rd. But when you read Gibbons, he says, but there were no stamps available for 2 days. So there are no stamps in Malacca for 2 days after this canceller arrived. Just another interesting cover. Again, it's cover sent and then resent. So here's the first stamps on the cover. It was sent to Taiping, and then Taiping sent it back to Singapore. So it came from Singapore to Taiping and came back. This is the original part of it. This is now what it looks like. The interesting part is not really from Penang, even though it's got a Pahang stamp, because the cancellations, it's really from Perak. Taiping is really in Perak, and it's a long way from Pahang. So they were allowed to use stamps from different parts of different states within Malaya, and this is just an exhibition. This is a very rare document. It has the Okagawa seal on the high value $100 Dai Nippon high value frame key plates. So it's revenue use, but I put it in anyways, even though they say don't put in revenue use, because it's just, they're very rare. But it's just indenture, it's purchase of land for $34,500 in those days. That would have been a lot of money. I find these stamps just kind of interesting. Again, they're the ones without overprints, without, you know, missing chops, red and black from Perak. Here is missing overprint in the strip, the Dai Nippon 2602 Malaya 1942. And that was the page that I put together to show that. These are booklet panes. These are unissued. These are overprints inverted, double overprints. And so some of them mint in use. So That's correct. Covers in Perak. Before they got stamps, they had to use covers. So this was what they did. They just wrote on them and then put their chop on it. The rate was 15 cents on the 1st of April until the 12th of May. And then it went up down to 8 cents. So these are in the book as well. You can see these postage marks in that same book done by Lyle Rowell. And here's another page of, so you can look these up later and see them. You can see various rates. Again, cover reused and sent back. An AR cover, which means that they had to advise the person who sent it that it had been received, but it was actually refused, and the addressee sent it back. Probably a bill, I don't know. And you can see all the various, you can see the postage paid, the hand stamps. These are all in the book, which makes it a really good book. All right. This is a Slinger cover, and you just, there aren't many covers from Slinger. This is really not from Slinger, it's from Penang, but there's nice inverted overprints on these two values, and this value is actually a 1936 stamp, reused in 1943, 42. And that's the cover, that's the thing. I just show you these Terengganu stamps because they're quite hard to get. And this is a significant item in the collection that has a red dot beside it. The page I only know of few of these. I know of 3 or 4 or 5 of these. I know only a few of these, so it's pretty good. And this is an interesting part. This is Thailand, Clanton that you saw earlier, Kedah, Perilous, and Terengganu were ceded in October 19th, 1943 from the Japanese to Thailand. So Thailand took over and they administered the system, and here's a cover using their stamps inside of, and that's their overprint was Kulam. You can see it here, Kulam Siburi. And it's an actual cover. They're hard to get. And I was told by the last person who reviewed this in Canada that I needed to have more Thai covers. So I got a Thai cover. Anyways, and here's a postcard from Thailand. That's what the page looked like. So these are Thai stamps that were used, the War Memorial, the original stamp, State of Arms, and the covers themselves. So those are all, you're able to see all those. This will be, I assume, on the website at some place. And that's part of that exhibition of, 5 frames.
Well, Tom, I'm going to do the official thank you, the formal thank you on behalf of the Philatelic Specialist Society of Canada. You've chosen a very, very complex, massive field and done a masterful job of giving us an overview, and with your exhibit, your 5-frame exhibit, covering really a lot of territory, just as indicated by that fabulous map you showed on one of the early slides. You gave us overviews with timetables and the Japanese calendar, and really showed your resources like the Proud book. I learned something new. I didn't know who Milo Rowell was. Now I know. You also you did your thorough research comparing different catalogs like Proud and Dai Nippon and Gibbons. So this is a fantastic learning. This was a very, very complex period in postal history because of the occupation. In our history books, we learn about the war ravages and the atrocities and the battles and the first losses and then victories and all that. But in fact, during the occupation, life still did go on in a certain manner of speaking, and people still conducted commerce and had to send letters and do mails. And some of the covers you show are absolute fantastic pieces of that history. And you're right, they are extremely rare because there wasn't a lot of mail sent. And then of course, after the occupation, we had the problem with fakes and remainders being reused and cancels being used after it was no longer correct to do so. But anyways, your job was fantastic. I will give you two critiques. You did misspell Labuan, and I'm not sure if the judges caught that, but you might want to correct that. Page.
They gave me 5.
And they probably didn't know themselves.
Well, probably right.
I will state about you don't have to apologize for not sending your expertization of this material to the Green, because the Green Foundation specializes in British North America. If you have Canadian or province material, we would love to certify that. But
I have lots of green certs. I have green certificates on my Newfoundland.
Great,
For sure.
Yeah. But I think you're fine to go to the Royal or the APS or whoever else you go to for those certifications. But anyways, in closing, I say thank you very much. This was extremely a big bit of knowledge that you shared with us all, and we're very happy to have you on board and be a good member of the team.
Well, I've enjoyed so far for the last year. It's good. Thanks very much.
Tom, this is I want to add my thanks to Ingo as well. This is your certificate, which I will be putting in the mail tomorrow. I was in a bit of a quandary when I made it up, because you're giving this presentation tomorrow in your time, but we're receiving it today in our time. So I wasn't sure whether to put the 16th or the 17th on. But thanks you once again. Amazing material you have there. I really enjoyed that. Thank you again.